Thank you, Gordon. Well, after 5 years of wild camping on the jebel, with 3 Sonny Lumiere thrown in, I transferred to the Civil Aid Department, where I was the Deputy Supervisor, with a particular responsibility for the development of the jebel. As such, I spent most of my time up on the jebel. I worked alone, and I was aware that times were changing, so I took a lot of photographs, and I'm about to show you some of those now. This, of course, is Dhofar. If we start with the Arabian Sea, there's a narrow coastal strip which widens to about 15 kilometers opposite Salalah, which is the capital. That area is called the jebel, and it's interesting to note that during the First World War, the British Army in Mesopotamia got its five-a-day from there. North of the jebel is the jebel, which rises to about 4,500 feet in the east, which is Jebel Samhan. In the center is Jebel Kara, and then down towards the Yemeni border, we have Jebel Karma. The northern edge of the jebel is bounded by the Gutton Ridge, and north of that is an enormous sand and gravel plain, which is the Negid, which merges with the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, although the people who live around it don't call it that. They call it Aramal, the sands, probably because an awful lot of the stuff there. If we come back to the jebel, to the central area, the people there are pastoral in nature. They herd their cows, their goats, their camels, and they practice transhumance, which is to say that they move according to the season within their tribal areas. The people on the jebel in the central area are the Kara and the Shahra, of whom more later. South of the jebel, we have the Beit al-Kathir. North of the jebel, we have the Beit Kathir and the Mahra. If we go down to the western area, down to Jebel Karma, we have the Beit Zabanot, the Hardan, Habes, Akak, Shamas, Mashaki, and a few other small tribes there, but they're too small to have tribal areas of their own. In marked contrast to the people who live in the central area, where the tribal boundaries are sharply delineated because they've been fighting over them for hundreds of years. At the western end of Jebel Kara, we have the Beit Said, who live around Jebel Kaftout. East of them is an area called Beit Zabeh. Apparently, this was purchased by the Beit al-Kathir from the Kara, and the people who live there are the Beit Ali bin Badr, Beit Muhammad bin Ahmed, and Beit Amr bin Muhammad. Two interesting things about the Beit Zabeh is that allegedly Nabi Ayub, better known to us as the biblical Job, is buried there. The other point of interest about Beit Zabeh is apparently Bertram Thomas, before he did his crossing of the empty quarter, he drew a picture in a cave. Unfortunately, it's been obliterated by naughty children, presumably the same naughty children who obliterated the memorials for the RAF aircrew who were killed around Donkey's Head in the 50s. East of Beit Zabeh, we have the Beit Gutton, who live in the Wadi Nahiz. At the northern end of the Wadi Nahiz, the Beit Barama lived. They are not Kara. They have come from somewhere up north. And interestingly enough, they don't actually own the ground that they live on. And while I was there, the Mendub of the Beit Barama, that is their government representative, he had the temerity to plant a dozen orange trees. Now, planting a tree signifies ownership of the land. He died in mysterious circumstances shortly after, as did his trees. When we come to the Midway Road, across the other side of that, to the east of it, is an area called Hadvadomri, where the Beit Tabor and the Beit Kishor live. Southeast of there, we have Jebel Nashib, where the Beit Jarbub live. Up above there, we have the Al-Mashdi, which is the tribe that the late Sultan Qaboos's mother came from. East of there, an area called Jalob, where the Alawiyad live. Now, they are not Kara. They are descendants from slaves who escaped from the coast. And then east of there, we have the Al-Amri, who are the biggest tribe on the Jebel. I said I'll come back to Shahri, so here I am. They are supposed to be the original people on the jebel. Back in the 16th century, when the Portuguese were making inroads looking for the Spice Islands, they moved along the coast there. They built several structures which are still there to this day. And the Shahri, asked the Curragh for assistance to repel them. When I asked where the Curragh had come from, I was told, Min al-Gharb, Abad al-Bihar, yani from the west, over the seas. I assume they didn't mean Lanzarote. I would guess that they came from the Horn of Africa, but I don't actually know. But the Curragh turned up, they integrated, they subjugated, they took over, they took everything, including the language, Shahri. Now, the people on the jebel today, pardon me, running a bit dry. People on the jebel today, they all speak Arabic, but amongst themselves, they speak Shahri. I, perforce, learned enough Shahri to understand what was going on in any conversations around me. Unfortunately, I've forgotten most of it now. There's not much call for it in the Wellington Sook. Next, please. This is a core. There are various cores along the coast. These are freshwater lagoons, bordered on the seaward side by a sandbar, which at spring high tides, the waves wash over, and during the monsoon, the sandbars are washed away altogether, rendering the water brackish. These two camels here aren't just enjoying a vegan breakfast. They are, in fact, in the water to escape the gefate, which are rather nasty little black biting flies. You couldn't take this picture again today. This is the eastern end of the Jarbabe, and that is a herd of cows, al-Huti, grazing. That's mainly gone now. Again, with this picture here, that's taken from slightly further east, some camels crossing the plain. If camels have to travel any distance these days, they do so in the back of a Toyota pickup. This is a shot taken along the southern edge of the jebel from west to east. Again, the area to the right of the picture is being rapidly built on. And all the little pockmarks that you can see, those are ants' nests. Most of them are underground, but quite a few of them rise to a height of about 6 feet. This is the Akabat Gade in the eastern area. Again, you couldn't take that picture today because running right up the middle of it is a great big tarmac road, which goes right up the top of the picture, swings right, and finishes up at Taoyater. Right, this is a hokab. In the center of the picture there, you'll see some little houses, but the main interest in this picture is the oval structure you see to the right. That's a stone wall surrounding a field. On the maps that we were issued with in 1971, those were annotated as cattle enclosures, whereas in fact it's the opposite way around. They were designed to keep the cows out rather than in. One of the other anomalies on the maps of that period was that there was a couple of features called ma'arif. And I can only assume that whoever gave that information said to a Jabali, "What's that jebel called?" And he said, "I don't know." So he wrote down Jebel Marif. There was a Wadi Marab as well. Another one, which I still have the map actually, there's in the central area, there's a wadi called Wadi Nohor Atre. So somebody said to a Jabali, "What's that called?" And he said, "Nohor Atre," which is River Atre in Shahri. So the Brits said, it's called Nohor Atre, therefore it's a Wadi Nohor Atre. So that's on the map now. But we can't laugh too much because, of course, we have the River Avon. It's the same kind of thing. This is an old track, which people will be familiar with that type. Again, those have all gone. Those are all great big tarmac roads running in pretty much straight lines. This is a strit or rigma. That's the old type of dwelling, long gone. It consists of a stone wall about 3 feet high and 2 feet in diameter. The roof is constructed of branches and covered in hay. Beyond it, to the left, you can make out a larger, flatter structure. That is a dukuf, or a cow house. And I remember back in May 1977, a group of Jabalis came down from the village of Darkhan, and they came to visit Sheikh Break bin Hamoud al-Ghafari, who was the Wali of Dhofar at that time. And they said, our cow house has been struck by lightning. It killed a woman and 50 cows, although not necessarily in that order. And we want compensation. So Sheikh Break called for me and he said, can you go up and have a look? So I went up there, and the woman had clearly been buried by that stage. The cow house was definitely damaged. And so I said, well, where are these 50 dead cows? And they said, well, we couldn't leave them around up here because their dead start smelling. So we stuffed them down a crack in the rocks. So I said, where? And they took me to a fissure in the rocks. And there's no way they could have got 1 cow down there, let alone 50 cows. So I went back to Sheikh Break and gave my report. And in due course, the Jabalis turned up looking for their compensation. And this is where he played an absolute blinder. He could have said, I've had this investigated, and what you're saying is a load of tosh, so go away. That would have caused a huge row, and my name would have been mud. Instead, he said to them, are you Muslims? They said, oh, yes, we're Muslims. So he said, was this the work of man or the work of God? They said, oh, it was the work of God. So Sheikh Break said, well, I'm a Muslim as well. So how do you expect me to compensate you for the will of God? Game, set, and match. This is another shot of some strit or rigaba. This is at the end of the season. They need rethatching, but you can see more clearly there the way those buildings were constructed. Hay was of vital importance in those days, and so a grass fire like this was absolutely disastrous. They used to use the hay both as fodder for the cows and for protection on their houses. This is another picture of a hokub. You can see the strit or rigum of the houses there. That's at the end of the bad season, and on top of some of them, you can see some of the tarpaulins which we used to give out due to the lack of hay. This is a muthla, or individually muthla, in a collective noun is mijib. And these were the little dwellings that they used to move to in the height of summer, down the ridges, both looking for grazing for the cattle and to find somewhere cooler to live. These are khadr. These are cave dwellings, mainly used by the goat people. Quite simply, that they find overhangs in the rock and block them off with branches and hay. And that's another picture of the same. Again, these kind of scenes are long gone because they're all living in brick houses with wriggly tin roofs. That is a typical monsoon scene, familiar to many of us here. The visibility drops down to about 50 to 60 meters. The soil underneath, which is classified as black cotton, sticks to your feet, and as you walk across it, you get taller and taller until one falls off and you fall over. And this is a scene from a wadi bottom. You can see how dense the vegetation grows during the monsoon, and there, left of the picture, you can just make out a man standing in it. This is another picture of a hokub, which couldn't be taken today, because as I said, they're all in brick buildings now. The road that you can see to the left is now tarmac, and then there's some fields there which you can see. And that's a closer picture of that. Typical fields, they used to grow maize, beans, tobacco, and a few other bits and bobs. That is the Wadi Darbat. The falls there are about 800 meters wide and 300 feet deep. The little road that you see starting off in the bottom center is now a tarmac road that runs all the way up through the wadi, right up the top right-hand corner where it turns right and finishes up in another lake full of pedalos for hire. This is the Wadi Darbat, or Nahor Dirabot, as they would say in Shahri, taken after the cyclone of 1977. That wiped out about 118 people. They were killed because they had taken refuge in the caves in the side of the wadi. Flash flood, all died, including most of the family of my friend Ali Said Ateek al-Mashayki, who I first met in the Firqat al-Umri at Chawiyater in 1973. He taught me Arabic script and I taught him English. And after the war, he transferred to the Oman Research Department, Intelligence. And he came to me one day and he said, they're sending me to Muscat on a course. I said, oh, jolly good, tell me all about it when you get back. And about 6 weeks later, he came back and I said, how did it go? Oh, all right. I said, where did you stay? He said, the Intercontinental Hotel. I was absolutely amazed that Jabali in the Intercon was absolute mayhem. So I said, what was the hotel like? And he said, well, the hotel was all right, but the food was pretty rubbish. So I said, well, what did you live on? He said, well, I found in the shops there, they sell fish in little plastic bags. And I found that if I left the bag out in the sun for 2 or 3 days, it was quite tasty eaten raw. And we worry about sell-by dates and storage. That again is the Wadi Darbat, still flowing months afterwards. Now this chap here, round his head, he's wearing a thing called a mahfif. That's about an 8-foot long plaited leather band, the end of which is splayed slightly to include a piece of wadding, which is soaked in perfume, and they use that to keep their hair under control. This little group here, he's a local sheikh coming down the Midway Road. You can't see it very clearly, but around his waist, he's wearing a thing called a sabika, which is about an 8-foot long length of cotton dyed with indigo, and that rubs off on their skin during the monsoon, and they maintain that helps to keep them warm. I'm not sure that that's science-based, but they say it works. Around his waist, he has an istibot, which is a belt, which is supporting the khanjar that you can see. And again, on his head, he's wearing a mahfif. Here's a close-up of the same, and that's in profile. You can see how it works there. These two reprobates I met along the road. Again, that's now a tarmac road. You wouldn't see this again today because they're both wearing sabikas. One's carrying a Kalashnikov, the other an FN rifle. Just doesn't happen anymore. I like this picture. I took it because he's got quite an interesting face. He's not wearing a mahfif, and you can see a bandolier over his right shoulder there, and there'll be a weapon somewhere nearby. Again, those have largely been surrendered now. Believe it or not, I asked his permission to take this photograph, but judging by the expression on his face, he's not very happy. He again is wearing a mahfif on his head. And he is straight out of Lord of the Rings. Just look at him. He's wearing his sabika over his shoulder there to keep himself warm. And again, the mahfif has gone a bit awry. Now this is Bin Jochjoch, son of the thunderstorm. Apparently in his youth, he was quite an aggressive individual, and he used to batter people with his stick whenever he came across them. The stick that he would have used comes from the mitane tree, which is a very, very dense wood, and it doesn't float in water. I know this for a fact because I've got one. Now, the reason why I took that photograph, I was trying to take a photograph of his hands, but he dodged me. Basically, his hands were both severely burned and he had contractures on them. That was caused by when he was living in his house, and they always had fires going in the middle, and every now and then they had a fire. They used to sleep on cowhide called reke, and the cowhide served a dual purpose insofar as you could use them to sleep on, or in the event of a fire, you took it up, you threw it over your shoulders, ducked down, and ran out through the doorway. The only bit of the person exposed is the fingers, and his was severely burned. This little gaggle here, they are wearing thobe, which is a robe, a black robe, and over their heads they're wearing shawls called lusi. The interesting thing about their hairstyles is it's normal for girls of that age to have their heads shaven, leaving a tuft at the front and a braid down the back. And again, looking beyond them, you can see more of the structure of the streets that they lived in. Now, this lovely lady here, I came across 3 houses on one occasion, and they appeared to be deserted. So I moved in close and called out, and there's a faint answering cry from inside one of them. So I went over to the doorway and called again, and she invited me in. And she was sitting there with her toddler, and we chatted for about an hour or so. Now, when I first went in, her luci was completely covering her. During the course of the conversation, it gradually slipped, revealing those lustrous locks, and she made no attempt to replace it. And before I went, I asked her if I could take a photograph, because it was so unusual, and she agreed. So if we look at the picture, around her neck, she's wearing a necklace called marit, which consists of pink coral, silver, and various colored beads. On her chin, you can make out a little line running from her lower lip around the chin, and possibly you could just make out a little dot on each side of them. That's a traditional tribal tattoo. In her nose, she has a silver ring called the badala. And now this is the bit that I was really interested in. If you look up the hairline, she appears to have a very wide parting. That is called minzarot, and it was carried out around the age of puberty by making a horizontal incision along the hairline here, connected to 2 tram lines all the way down to the nape, then another horizontal cut, and then peel the whole lot off. It seems to be dying out now for some reason or other. While we're on the subject of pain, the other thing that they go in for is wusum, or branding, applied both to human beings and animals, where essentially a red hot piece of iron is applied to the site of the supposed problem. I'd imagine, if nothing else, it would take their minds off the original one. But one of the saddest things I saw were epileptics who had been so frequently and so severely branded that their faces were distorted as if they didn't have enough to suffer. This is a cot called a fidate. It's made out of wood and cowhide. It's light, the legs are springy so it can be rocked, and it's light enough to be carried on the back. That is it from the side. I got one that's now in the British Museum, together with about another 26 artifacts that I collected while I was there that are going out of fashion. In the bottom of the picture, you can see a cream-colored tin. That's powdered milk. When powdered milk emerged on the scene, there was a marked rise in infant mortality because they gave up from breastfeeding, a lot of the women there, for the more convenient bottle feeding without the knowledge to sterilize the equipment. This you don't see anymore. Great big herd of cows. They are heading down to water, to a water hole about 1,000 feet below in the wadi. They don't need to do that anymore because of the prevalence of water boreholes on top. And I haven't seen herds of cows that size since. I like this picture. One of the cows gave birth on the way going down to water, and that little lad was given the job of carrying the calf back home. This is dried sardines. They capture sardines off the coast mainly by purse seine netting, and they set them to dry underneath the palm trees there, and they're used as cattle fodder. They used to be fed whole sardines to the cows, which they'd happily eat. Of course, they don't do that anymore now because of the prevalence of modern farming techniques, feed, etc. This is milk making equipment. You can see a tripod there. At the back, you can just make out a large goat skin called a neat. They make those by not skinning the animal in a normal way, but they take the skin off like pulling off a jumper, and they tie off the legs, and they use both for carrying water and milk. To the front of it, there's a thing which looks a bit like a sort of brown tennis racket with a long tail. That's called a fledjib. And bull calves are slaughtered very shortly after birth because they're not a lot of use. But to persuade the mother to continue giving milk, they would skin them, stretch the hide over a wooden framework, and at milking time, they'd damp the hide down with a little bit of milk, offer it to mummy cow, who presumably said, "our baby," or worse to that in cow language, and let her milk down. The other method of persuading a cow to let her milk down is one jabali would take hold of the cow's head to stop it from running away. The other would go around to the other end, flick the tail over his shoulder, and blow hard into its nether regions. I've not seen that on Country File. This is a typical hearth. Those two bulls that you can see are called garlows. They're made from plaited palm leaves with a leather base to strengthen them. The left one you can see, which has milk in it, also has a stone in it. That's come straight from the fire. It's a hot stone. It serves to warm up the milk and also to stop brucellosis. Now, this lady here is churning milk to make butter or salmon. That's the inflated skin with the milk in it. After she's done that enough, she'll take it off and pump it up and down on the ground until the butter separates. It's called salmon, and they used to add salt to it. Now, in the absence of refrigeration, the salmon becomes rancid very quickly, and every meal, of course, is a great big heap of rice with a great big knob of salmon on top. It's very much an acquired taste, one which I was forced to acquire out of necessity. The buttermilk is called mizzle, and drunk first thing in the morning, while it's really cold and fizzy, is really refreshing, or at least I thought so then. This is a khedar. This is a tent of the camel people. And as you can see, it's made from old women's clothing, or maybe I should rephrase that, women's old clothing, I think sounds better. And to the front there, leaning against the post, you can see a garlo drying. Here's a group of them out on the Jarbabe. Again, they can't do that anymore. There are too many buildings there. But to the front, you can see some baby camels. They're called Jaoud. They're either hobbled or masked to stop them from wandering off. And this little group of lads have been given the job of brushing up the camel droppings to dry in the sun for use on the fire. In the background here, you can see pipe work stretching over the jebel. That was one of the things that the Civil Aid Department used to do, pumping water from the various boreholes. Again, a very large herd of camels there. I haven't seen herds that large since. I think the economy of the jebel must be changing in recent years, allowing fewer livestock. Again, This chap is selling firewood. He's got his load there. You can just possibly make out he's wearing a mafif. Again, you don't see this anymore because you can get far more in the back of a pickup. Again, big herd of goats, herder with his FN rifle over his shoulder, not seen anymore. But what is interesting is they don't need to use any means to herd the goats. The goats automatically follow him. They know him. This is Ein Sahalnot on the Jarbabe at the foot of the jebel. It flows all the year round. And that used to be connected to that aqueduct, which was washed away in the cyclone of 1977 and not rebuilt. This is a waterhole in a wadi bottom. There's camels there. And in the back left, you can just make out some sacks of cement, which we used to have helicoptered in. And that's a closer view of the same one. You can see the bags of cement of a picture there. And the old plan was that people would go down there with their buckets, containers, whatever, carry the water up to troughs like that for the camels to drink from. Before the advent of all the water boreholes on top of the jebel, water was always at a premium. They would do anything they could to collect it. And so here's a seepage coming through some limestone rocks, and they'd use whatever containers they had there to collect the water. This is another form of water collection called auno. What they've done is they've dug a hole underneath a tree, rendered it with lime or some cement. So during the monsoon, the water drips from the tree into that and fills it up. This chap here was trying to persuade me to do something about that seepage there. But the real reason why I took that photograph is because of what's going on beyond him. Back, please.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I'm waving my hands around. This is in the Jalop. Those the Alawayed hard at work. And what they were doing is building a dam, a sed. I took an engineer up to have a look at it with a view to seeing what we could do to help. But before we could do anything, the cyclone hit it and washed a whole lot away. He estimated there were 2,000 tons of rock there that had been moved by hand. This is a mudhun. Essentially, it is a large sheet of rock called a sulfot. At the end of it, they built a wall called a sed, and that was at a place called Kotov Hoy, and that was taken before the monsoon, and that's it after the monsoon. I could almost barbecue there. It looks really nice. Now, on another occasion, I decided to have a closer look at the eastern area. And so I went to Jibjat, which is up on the Gutton Ridge to the north. I collected 3 or 4 Firks. They were the local militia, if you like, to act as my guides. And we went off. And after about 7 days, I came across this enormous mudhun at a place called Egort Edor. It was really impressive, and I was in need of refreshment. And so I stripped off down to my shreddies and jumped in. And that's me there in the middle, splashing around, taken by a couple of Firks. And then after a while, I spotted that overhang, which is center right of the picture. And underneath it was a shaver, an old man, clutching a Martini Henry rifle. So I swam over to him and treading water. I went through all the usual greetings. And I said, "What are you doing here? Why are you sitting there?" And he said, "I'm here to stop people from swimming in this drinking water." And so I made to get out. He said, "No, no, no." He said, "You can swim in it because you're here to help us." And that brings me to the end. If anybody has any questions, I'll be pleased to try and answer them. Thank you.
You said all the dwellings that you photographed were long ago, and it's not like that now, but it's not all that long ago at all.
Oh, no, no.
70s, it was
Yeah,
exactly
50
like
years.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Is Shahri universally spoken? And if not, what do you believe the future of those local languages are?
Probably like Welsh. People will probably try to keep them going. It gives them a sense of nationality, of separateness, if you like. I mean, if there's another language, a whole load of other languages around there which are similar. That there is Mahari, for example, which is allied to Shahri, and Batahari, and so on. But I don't know very much about those.
And you think they'll die?
Possibly, yes, yes. So you were.
Peter, fabulous, and certainly reminded us what it was like to be out there. My wife and I were out in Dhofar from 81 to 86, called the back end of war. So wonderful pictures. Question, and here's my question, is we've been back several times up to and finally in about 2014. When we were living out there, there was a great Zanzibari presence. You know, you'd see the ladies in wonderful colours and the men were very clearly Zanzibari. In the latter years when we were out there in 2010, 2012 and so on, that had almost disappeared. And my question to you is understanding what might have happened out there in your time, have you any idea what happened to the Zanzibaris?
Well, the origin of the Zanzibar, as I understand it, is they are slave stock. They came up from Zanzibar because Oman at that time was a centre of slavery in that part of the world. Certainly all the palace staff were of that stock. And as with slavery in that part of the world, it doesn't mean to say that they were repressed.
No.
They were part of the family, largely, but they were also considered to be second-class citizens. I remember on one occasion there was a haboot in front of the palace where all the tribes come down and they dance before the Sultan. And when the Zanzibari ladies came down with their bright luces, jumping and undulating, and I ostentatiously lowered my camera to make sure that people would see that I wasn't going to photograph these women. And the Jabali standing next to me, he said, "Oh, it's all right," he said. "You can photograph them. They're Mithil Hanud al-Ahmar. They're like Red Indians." I hope that answered your question.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Okay, that's
I
fine.
don't know, sorry.
But thank you for your comment.
You're welcome.
From a tribal perspective, when you first went in 1970, how significant was the border between Oman and Makkah? And did you notice any change in the way the border impacted on life in Dhofar? I mean, presumably there was no fence in 1970. Now there's a fence which actually separates one from t'other.
Well, the border has moved, of course, since then. Makina Shahan used to be in the Sultanate. Now it's in P Dry, which is a pity because I used to be OC Makina Shahan for a short while. Yeah. So my commander's gone. No, I've not noticed any changes along those lines. They are still intensely tribal among themselves. And what makes a bit of a mess of their border is the fact of the Mahra, the southern Mahra, their whole tribal area is on both sides of the border. So there is a problem there to brew.
So, I mean, in your time, did people cross the border frequently and maintain links with people on the other side of the border?
When I put this to the Mahra, they said, "What border?"
Mentioned lots of tribes at the beginning. I mean, what sort of area did these tribes have? They must have only a few acres in some cases.
Quite a few acres, actually. Possibly the one with the smallest acreage would have been the Beit al-Kathir and Beit Zarbeh. But that must be a couple of hundred acres easily. You've got to look at it in the context of the whole spread of the jebel. They are quite large areas, particularly if you're on foot.
Yeah.
You mentioned all the roads that have now been put in around the jebel, etc. Do you think that's affected the tribal layout, and how much has that meant that some tribes are now almost lost, if you like?
I don't think that affects them because they are still acutely aware of their tribal boundaries. They know them down to the very last stone. One of the interesting things about the roads there is when you go on them now, you often see large blood patches on them where cattle have been hit on the road. And because there's no rain, appreciable rain until the monsoon, those stains stay there all the year round. And you find them on most of the corners there now, unfortunately.
Seemed to suggest that the camel was being phased out. But I recall certainly in the late 90s, the camel had become a major problem in the jebel. They had increased in huge numbers and were destroying the vegetation. Is that not the case anymore?
I really don't know. From my own personal observation, I think there is fewer livestock there than there were in my time. One of the things which is likely to destroy the vegetation is the camels mainly eat in the wadi bottoms. And what the herders do is they climb up the trees and they snap the branches over so the camels can reach them. But with the regular occurrence of the monsoon every year, I'm quite sure those trees are readily replaced.
Slightly difficult question to answer, Peter, but because I know that when you've been back, I've been there on the same occasion. But what's the driver behind Dhofari culture? Is it still a bit nationalistic, or is it sort of one of the culture that's sort of aligning itself with the rest of Oman?
This is probably politically pardon me. Incorrect. Oh, thank you. But really, the Dhofaris are different from the Northern Omanis, tribally, ethnically, in every way. Just looking at them, I remember when I was in Masandam, I was walking through the Suk one day, and I identified a Jabali from 50 yards from the back. I could just tell by the way he was walking, he was different. They are different, but they are all one country now, if you like, a bit like the United Kingdom. We are one nation, but with disparate groups within that one nation.
On the entrance on your St. Antony's paper that you got up with the tribal survey of Sunderland, I was wondering if you could say anything about how you just look at the contrast or the same methodology, or just anything between what you noticed between the tribe and the far and the Sunderland. Sort of like
Doing that in Musandam was more difficult than Dhofar. One, I knew Dhofar much better, and I was known by the people there across the jebel because I went everywhere. I found the far easier to talk to, although initially they were quite suspicious, so I had my own way of questioning them. Musandam was different. The Shehu up there are fairly xenophobic. They didn't know me. And so it was more difficult getting that information out of them. But I'm satisfied that what I got is pretty accurate.
Went to Oman as a soldier and left as an aid worker. Could you talk us through that?
What do you mean when I returned to UK?
Yeah, well, when you were working in Oman as civil aid.
Oh, well, going from a soldier to civil aid was a natural progression insofar as I knew the country, I knew the people, I spoke the language. That was a natural progression with the end of the war.
how were the relations between the Shahri and the people of the Jebel and the people of Sultan at the time you were there?
Well, the Shahri were generally considered to be inferior, having been subjugated. At one stage, they weren't allowed to carry arms. but the war changed that to an extent. There's quite a lot of contact between the people living on the Jarbabe and the people living on the jebel, insofar as during the monsoon, the jebel is a nice place to go because it's cool and damp. They also sell their dates there. They sell their fish to the Jabalis. So there's quite a lot of interaction between the two groups there. I think that's it.
I think that's almost a cue to say thank you so much. Absolutely superb. Good.